Thanks so much. Lovely to be back here, and a great, amazing achievement that this is the 13th of these events, so I'm really pleased to be back here. I've got 10 minutes to talk about global regulatory change. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, so I'm going to talk about some of the themes, and actually regulation, if you make slides out of regulation, is pretty boring, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the impacts of regulation have on market, which is something that really interests me. Let's put some context on this. So I think it's really worth just understanding the size of the gap still between novel nicotine products and combustible cigarettes. On the right-hand side here, we've got the number of combustible cigarette users in the world. This is global, so over 1 billion. It is declining, but it's declining pretty slowly. And in some markets, we know it's not declining because we've got increased population and we haven't got a big slowdown in combustible use. Of course, in Western markets, and we were talking about the US and the UK, yes, we've got vaping, reaching the same sorts of levels as smoking prevalence, but that is not the case globally, and I think it's really worth bearing that in mind. And then on the left-hand side, we've got the novel nicotine product users, and of course they're tiny in comparison, so we've got an awful long way to go still. But I think that what's very positive about all of this is those growth rates in green that you can see. So, we've got 135 million users of novel nicotine products, and they are growing really fast. And I think that that's, hopefully that massive amount of headroom is still, there's something optimistic in that. Okay, so we've got regulation coming through. So this year, next year, 26, is going to be a really big year. We've got, obviously, the regulations that we've talked about, the Tobacco and Vapes Bill in the UK. In the EU, we've got the TPD coming through, Tobacco Products Directive, the Tobacco Excise Directive. We've got huge amounts of policy being developed in the EU right now. In the US, we've got lots happening. We're yet to see really what the FDA is going to do. And of course, we've just had COP11 with the WHO and their view. But what I wanted to really focus on here was a little bit around unintended consequences of regulation. Here is a picture of what happens in the UK the closed system vape market in the UK. And as we all have talked about earlier on, in today's session, there was a disposable ban that came in June this year. What you can see here is just how the market preempted that change way before the disposable ban, but also the sort of unintended consequences of this disposable ban. So these are products this is tracking on a quarterly basis the products that are available in the UK market. And as you can see, back in the start of 2023, disposables was a massive chunk of the closed system vape market, but also we had that orange bar, the pre-filled pods above it. And as time went on, we started to see these disposable big puffs coming into the market. A lot of those were destined for the US market, but they came into the UK market. And as you can see, as news filtered through of the disposable vape ban in the UK, what we started to see was that sort of pink bar at the top of the charts come through, which was the 2+10. So it was the way the industry responded to the threat of a disposable ban was to start developing these products. Actually, what's happened, I think, is that these 2+10 models are now going out throughout the US. So in a way, it's an unintended consequence of a disposable ban here in the UK, which has caused a whole new development, a whole new innovation, which is going around Europe. And it's very similar to what one of the speakers was talking about in the US, where the ban on flavored pods led to a disposable vape market, and we all know where that went. Okay, this I think is really interesting as well. So we did a survey before and after the UK disposable ban. On the left-hand side there, you can see Q2 compared to Q3 this year in terms of numbers of respondents using open systems versus the two types of closed systems. And what happened following the disposable ban was, of course, we saw a big increase in the number of pre-filled pods. but we still see consumers using disposables. So effectively, this disposable ban hasn't been completely successful. We've still got a quarter of respondents saying that they use disposables. For me, though, the really awful thing is on the right-hand side. When you ask consumers in the UK after the disposable ban, what are they doing with the pre-filled pod products that they buy once they run out of juice? And the answer is nearly half of them are throwing them away. So they're treating them just like disposables. And again, the unintended consequences of this is that what was brought in as a measure to try to control environmental damage has actually made it worse because consumers are throwing these products away. The actual environmental damage from a product that is rechargeable is slightly worse, I understand, than a disposable in the first place. So I guess the lesson from this is be really, really careful about how you regulate, because unintended consequences are always going to be part of that, and the market will always adapt to these changes. Okay, I'm going to throw up a very quick map. I'm not going to talk about it much. There's huge amounts of regulatory change going on. One of the big areas, particularly in vape, is around flavours. I just wanted to make the point that in the UK, there's a lot of talk about flavour restrictions, but that's not unique by any means. In fact, most of the world is talking about some kind of flavour restriction for nicotine products. And we're going to see this continue. So these kinds of policy areas are developing really, really fast. It's one of the big regulatory levers that governments think they have to control the flavour profile of these products. And I think it's really an important area to understand how exactly that flavour restriction is going to be applied. And I think, as we've talked about earlier, kind of bans of flavours are very unlikely to be very successful. We've seen that in many European countries who've got flavour bans already. Okay, last few minutes. So I'm just going to talk a bit about illicit. One of the biggest problems in the vape sector at the moment is the prevalence of illicit products in the market. It's not actually so much a problem for companies that are not illicit and are facing illicit products. The biggest problem, I think, is that consumers see these illicit products and it creates a really bad impression of the sector as a whole, and consumers lose confidence. If you're looking down the high street and you see lots and lots of coloured vape products that look like they're illicit, that causes massive confidence problems in the sector as a whole. We started tracking enforcements around the world, and again, I think one of the slides earlier on was looking at enforcement in the UK. I think we can take some positive from some positivity from this, just because we're trying to track all the enforcement actions that we can see around the world. They're very difficult to track, obviously, but they're clearly going up around the world. There's much more focus on enforcement, and that is going to be a very good thing to try and get the market back into line. Another couple of things to take from this. So it's mostly around vape. So at the moment, most of the enforcement actions are around vape. That will probably change over time, but that's the case at the moment. And 1 in 5 of the enforcement actions are carrying out in the US at the moment. And again, the FDA has got huge increase in funding for enforcement actions. I think we're going to see more and more of this. So I think this is a good chart. This is showing that enforcement will start to make the market kind of work better. Final point in my last minute, we do an MEP survey every year, roughly. These are incredibly difficult to do, but what we're trying to do is ask members of the European Parliament what they think about novel nicotine products. I think it's probably not worth taking each of these bars alone and deriving a lot from that, but I think it's quite interesting to compare year to year. And I think it gives you a bit of an idea about the sentiment in the European Parliament. It's worth noting that we have a new European Parliament, so this latest 2025 survey is with the new Parliament. And I think the big sort of takeaways from this chart, we've got two sides to this. So on the left-hand side are respondents who are aware of novel nicotine products in some way or have good knowledge, and on the right are those that claim they have no knowledge at all. And I think what you can first see is that there's a very different profile in terms of answering the question about the risk profile of these products. So MEPs who claim to have some kind of knowledge are 2/3 likely to say that these products are less harmful than smoking. And of course, on the right-hand side, it's much less, although it's increased, since we started doing that. So that's the first thing. The other thing to say is I think generally we've seen a polarization of people's views over time. So as you can see with that grey bar on the top, there were quite a few respondents who were not willing to really give a view as to whether these products were less harmful or more harmful than smoking. And I think what we're seeing is that that's changed now, that MEPs are much more likely, even if they don't understand the products, they're much more likely to have a view about them, whether that's negative or positive. And so as you can see, we've got an increase in those that think these products are less harmful, but we've also got an increase in those that think they are as harmful or more harmful. And I think that is an area where there is certainly some concern, and there's a lot of concern given that this is a group of people who are going to decide policy in Europe, and that won't just be for Europe, it'll have implications for the rest of the world as well. So I'll leave it there. I'm over time, but thanks very much.